Have you ever wondered why one of the greatest empires in history collapsed? Was it wars, barbarian invasions, or maybe inflation? That's right. Today we're going to dive into how inflation destroyed the mighty Roman Empire. Spoiler alert, ancient Rome didn't have a central bank to bail them out. Picture this, you're a Roman citizen around 200 AD. Life is pretty good. You've got running water, public baths, and you can go to the Colosseum for some good old-fashioned gladiator fights. But then something starts to change. Prices for your everyday things, bread, wine, olives, that start to rise. And not by a little. Suddenly your trusty silver coin isn't stretching as far as it used to. You're spending more and more of your hard-earned denarii on the same loaf of bread. Why, you ask? Well, let's rewind a bit to see where it all went wrong. Let's dig deeper into what was really going on. Around the 3rd century AD, Rome was no longer the unstoppable force it had been centuries earlier. Sure, they still had vast territories and legions of soldiers, but underneath the surface, the cracks were beginning to show. The empire was fighting wars on multiple fronts, from the Germanic tribes up north to the Persian Empire in the east. Wars aren't cheap, and neither is maintaining a sprawling empire. But the problem wasn't just the wars. The Roman government was also riddled with corruption. Imagine officials lining their pockets with gold while the people suffered. It wasn't just about personal greed. Corruption slowed down the empire's ability to function efficiently. Roads weren't maintained, armies weren't properly supplied, and the once strong administrative machine of Rome started grinding to a halt. And if that wasn't enough, the emperors were spending like there was no tomorrow. Not just on defending the empire, but also on lavish palaces, extravagant public games, and of course their own personal luxuries. The emperors wanted to project an image of unshakable power and wealth, so they built monuments and statues in their own honor, held extravagant feasts, and showered themselves with luxuries. They wanted to be seen as gods walking among men. But all of this came at a huge cost. So how did they cover the massive costs? The emperors needed money fast, and they turned to the one solution that seemed easy: making more coins. But instead of getting more silver, which was scarce and valuable, they started cutting corners. They reduced the amount of silver in the coins and replaced it with cheaper metals like copper or tin. This was essentially Rome's version of printing money out of thin air, thinking it wouldn't catch up with them. At first, this sleight of hand worked. People didn't immediately notice because, on the surface, the coins still looked the same. You'd see the emperor's face stamped on one side and a symbol of Roman might on the other. It all seemed business as usual, but beneath that shiny surface, the value was eroding. Merchants who handled large volumes of these coins soon caught on. They realized that the coins they were getting in exchange for goods didn't have the same silver content as before. And here's where the real problem started. They responded by raising prices. If a coin had less silver in it, merchants wanted more of those coins to compensate for the loss in value. This was the beginning of what we call inflation. It wasn't an overnight disaster, but it snowballed. As more and more coins with less intrinsic value circulated, the cost of goods went up. People found themselves needing more coins just to buy the same everyday items they could afford with fewer coins before. It wasn't long before the value of money became so diluted that a single loaf of bread could cost you a literal wheelbarrow full of coins. This was a serious issue because once inflation spirals out of control, it becomes incredibly hard to fix. And this wasn't just a minor inconvenience for people buying bread. This economic instability rippled through Roman society, weakening its very foundation. The empire was unknowingly sowing the seeds of its own collapse. As inflation worsened, it didn't just affect the market stalls and bread prices. It began to unravel the very fabric of the Roman Empire. The Roman military, once the pride of the empire, was the first to feel the real sting. Roman soldiers were used to receiving regular pay, and not just any pay. They were paid in silver coins, a valuable commodity that symbolized the strength and wealth of the empire. But as the silver content in their pay started dwindling, soldiers found themselves holding coins that weren't worth as much as they used to be. Imagine being a soldier, risking your life on the front lines only to find out that your paycheck is practically worthless. Not surprisingly, this led to widespread dissatisfaction in the ranks. Soldiers who had once fought with honor and loyalty were now struggling to support their families. And here's the thing about soldiers, they're trained fighters. When they're unhappy, it's not like they're just going to quietly quit their jobs and go home. Many soldiers, feeling betrayed by the empire, deserted their posts, but it didn't stop there. Some even joined the very barbarian tribes they were supposed to be fighting against. These tribes, eager to destabilize Rome, offered the deserters better pay or promised them land. It's ironic, isn't it? The empire that had once been so powerful, that had once conquered these barbarian tribes, was now losing its own soldiers to them. This wasn't just a military problem. It was a political disaster. Rome could no longer defend its vast borders effectively, leaving it vulnerable to invasions and attacks from all sides. And it wasn't just the military that was falling apart. The government itself was feeling the effects of inflation. The empire had always prided itself on its infrastructure. Its roads, aqueducts, and public buildings were the envy of the ancient world. But maintaining this massive infrastructure required money, and as inflation spiraled out of control, that money dried up. Roads that were once bustling with trade and soldiers fell into disrepair. Aqueducts that supplied clean water to Roman cities started to crumble. Without proper roads and transportation networks, the flow of goods and resources slowed to a trickle, further strangling the economy. As the economy faltered, so did agriculture, which was the backbone of the Roman economy. Farmers, already struggling with rising costs due to inflation, couldn't sell their crops at prices people could afford. The result, crops rotted in the fields, farmers went bankrupt, and food shortages hit hard. Hunger and poverty spread across the empire, leading to widespread discontent among the population. It wasn't long before that discontent boiled over into full-blown riots. In cities across the empire, people took to the streets demanding food, money, and change. Rome, once the heart of the empire, became a city of chaos. Civil unrest made it impossible for the government to maintain control. And as the situation worsened, confidence in the Roman leadership plummeted. Then, to make matters even worse, the emperors themselves couldn't keep the throne. The empire went through a revolving door of emperors, each one hoping to solve the crisis, but none of them able to get a grip on it. Between 235 and 284 AD, the empire had over 20 emperors, most of whom were assassinated or overthrown in coups. The rapid turnover in leadership made it impossible to implement any long-term solutions. Every new emperor brought new policies, new promises, but no real answers. This constant instability further undermined the empire's ability to recover from the financial crisis. In short, inflation didn't just make bread more expensive. It destabilized the military, destroyed the economy, caused political chaos, and led to the collapse of Roman society from within. The mighty empire, which had once seemed invincible, was now teetering on the brink of disaster, with each day bringing it closer to its eventual fall. By the time we reached the split between the Eastern and Western Roman empires, the situation had become dire. In 285 AD, Emperor Diocletian, realizing the empire was too vast and complex to be governed by one man, divided it into two. The Eastern Roman Empire, ruled from Byzantium, later known as Constantinople, and the Western Roman Empire, ruled from Rome. On paper, this might have seemed like a solution to Rome's problem, so two emperors could better manage the immense responsibilities of defending the borders, maintaining infrastructure, and dealing with internal crises. Right, well, not quite. While the Eastern Roman Empire was relatively wealthier, more urbanized, and had more secure borders, the Western Roman Empire faced constant threats from barbarian invasions, economic decay, and political instability. Inflation was ravaging the West. The constant devaluation of currency meant the Western Roman Empire couldn't fund its armies, repair its crumbling infrastructure, or stabilize its government. As a result, the Western Empire became the weaker of the two, relying on the East for military and financial support. The Eastern Roman Empire, often referred to as the Byzantine Empire, managed to survive for another 1,000 years. But the West? It continued to spiral downward. Barbarian tribes such as the Visigoths, Vandals, and Ostrogoths began to carve up Roman territory. These invasions were no longer just a nuisance, they became existential threats. Rome, once the conqueror, was now the conquered. And here's where inflation played its crucial role. The Western Empire didn't have the financial strength to push back these invaders. Its economy was too far gone, weakened by years of reckless monetary policy and endless military expenses. The government couldn't levy enough taxes because the population was impoverished. The military couldn't recruit or maintain soldiers because their pay was worthless. Everything, from civil services to basic governance, was deteriorating. By 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire officially collapsed when the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer. It marked the end of the empire that had once ruled the known world. And while historians point to a multitude of reasons for Rome's fall, barbarian invasions, internal corruption, civil war, inflation was one of the silent killers. The empire had debased its currency for centuries, and by the end, there simply wasn't enough real wealth left to sustain it. The Roman Empire had learned the hard way. You can't just print your way out of financial problems. The value of a currency is tied to trust, and once that trust is gone, it's nearly impossible to regain. So what does this mean for us today? Inflation isn't just a relic of ancient history, it's a modern problem too. The lessons from Rome remind us of what can happen when governments manipulate their currency without thinking about long-term consequences. When the value of money erodes, economies falter, and entire societies can collapse under the weight of financial mismanagement. So the next time you hear someone talking about inflation, think of Rome and their wheelbarrows of nearly worthless coins. Remember, it wasn't just swords and barbarians that brought down an empire. Sometimes, it's economic mismanagement that can topple even the mightiest powers. What do you think? Could inflation be the downfall of modern economies? Or have we learned from history's mistakes? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the fall of Rome, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more untold stories from history and economics. Until next time, keep questioning the past to understand the present.